The charity dinner had been running smoothly for 3 hours. Mallory Pierce had worked enough of these events to move through them like water, quiet, efficient, invisible in the way that hotel management liked their staff to be invisible. Smile, refill, step back, repeat. She had the rhythm memorized, and tonight she needed the overtime, so she kept her head down and her tray steady. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel was everything Manhattan liked to show off. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces that cost more than Mallory's monthly rent. The kind of room where people wore jewelry to charity events, but never actually talked about the cause they were supposed to be supporting. Table 7 was the problem table. It always was at these things. Whoever booked the center seats closest to the stage thought the location gave them permission to behave badly. Tonight, Table 7 held 8 guests, business partners, their spouses, a woman named Vanessa Sterling, who had arrived draped in a silver gown and a permanent expression of mild disappointment, and beside her, Grayson Vale. Mallory had noticed him the way you notice something quietly expensive, not flashy, but impossible to ignore. Tall, dark suit with no tie, a jaw sharp enough to cut glass. He had barely touched his food all evening and spent most of dinner looking at his phone, nodding occasionally at whatever Vanessa was saying, with the energy of a man counting down the minutes to somewhere else. Mallory approached the table to collect the appetizer plates. She moved carefully, reaching across the table to retrieve the last dish closest to Vanessa's elbow, when Vanessa's voice cut through the table conversation at full volume. "Careful with that sleeve, darling. You might snag it on her outfit." The table went quiet. Mallory straightened, plate in hand. Vanessa looked directly at her with the pleasant smile of someone who was fully aware of what they were doing. "I'm serious. Look at that fabric. Is that polyester? In this hotel?" She tilted her head toward the man beside her. "Gray, can you smell the discount store from here?" A few people at the table laughed nervously. Someone at the adjacent table turned around. Mallory kept her face completely still. She had been in difficult situations before. Drunk guests, impatient executives, people who thought service staff were furniture. She knew how to absorb it and keep moving. She set the plate on her tray, straightened her back, and prepared to step away without a word. But Vanessa wasn't finished. "I just think the hotel should have standards," she continued, louder now, fully performing for the room. "If you're going to work a $500 a plate dinner, you shouldn't look like you bought your uniform from a clearance bin. It's embarrassing for everyone." She gestured vaguely toward Mallory's frame. "And frankly, that uniform was not designed to accommodate—" She paused, letting the pause do its dirty work. "Every body type." The ballroom was not silent yet, but it was getting there. Heads at neighboring tables had turned. A woman near the stage put down her fork. Mallory felt the heat rise into her face. Not embarrassment, anger. The specific, grinding kind that comes from being humiliated in public for something that has nothing to do with your performance and everything to do with someone else's cruelty. She breathed through it. She was at work. She needed this job. She was about to turn and walk toward the kitchen when a chair scraped back. Grayson Vale stood up. It was such a quiet movement that it somehow commanded more attention than anything Vanessa had just said. He set his napkin on the table. He buttoned the single button on his jacket. And then he turned to Mallory, not to Vanessa, not to the table, directly to Mallory. And when he spoke, his voice carried just enough to reach the tables closest to them. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was inexcusable. You've done your job professionally all evening, and you didn't deserve a single word of that." Mallory blinked. She hadn't expected that. Vanessa laughed, a sharp little sound. "Gray, sit down. I was just—" "We're done, Vanessa." He said it the way you close a window. Simple. Final. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the engagement ring she had been wearing since February, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. No scene, no raised voice, just the soft click of the ring against the linen. And then he looked back at Mallory once more. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." And then he walked out. No argument, no dramatic exit speech. He just left, through the side door nearest the lobby, and the room watched him go in complete silence. Vanessa stared at the ring. Someone at a nearby table whispered something to the person beside them. A man in a grey suit cleared his throat. Somewhere near the back of the room, a fork clinked against a plate, and the sound seemed to snap everyone back into the present. Mallory stood there for exactly 3 seconds longer than she should have. Then she picked up her tray, walked back to the service station, set it down carefully, and pressed both palms flat against the counter. Her hands were shaking, but not from sadness. She had worked in hospitality for 6 years. She had been talked over, talked past, dismissed, and ignored by people with expense accounts and entitlement issues. Not once had anyone in her presence stood up like that, without being asked, without making it about themselves. She didn't know anything about Grayson Vale, except that he was wealthy and apparently engaged to someone awful. Now she knew one more thing about him. She stood at the counter for a moment, staring at the wall, then picked up her tray again and walked back out onto the floor. She still had 4 tables to finish. The next morning, Mallory arrived at work 30 minutes early. She always did on the days after difficult shifts, not because management required it, but because moving helped her process things. Restocking the service stations, checking linen supplies, reviewing the lunch reservation list. Routine was something she trusted more than most people. Last night had circled through her mind longer than she would have liked. Not Vanessa's words specifically, she had heard variations of those before, from different mouths, at different tables. What kept coming back was the moment after. The chair scraping, the quiet apology, the ring placed on the table like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had already been written. She had looked him up when she got home, not obsessively, just enough to understand what she had witnessed. Grayson Vale, 28, CEO of Vale Holdings, a company with fingers in real estate, private security, and international logistics. The internet had plenty of opinions about what else those fingers touched, but Mallory had stopped reading when the language started leaning toward rumor. She wasn't interested in gossip. She just wanted context, and now she had enough of it. He was powerful, he was wealthy, and apparently he had ended a 2-year engagement in 30 seconds over a comment directed at a waitress. That part still sat strangely with her. Not badly, just strangely. She was organizing the dessert station when the front desk manager, Claire, appeared at the kitchen door with an expression that sat somewhere between professional and flustered. "There's someone here asking for you," Claire said. "Specifically you. He said he doesn't have a reservation. He's not here to dine. He just wants 2 minutes if you're available." Mallory already knew who it was before Claire said the name. She untied her apron, smoothed her uniform, and walked out to the hotel lobby. Grayson Vale was standing near the window that faced the street, dressed in dark jeans and a plain grey jacket. The kind of casual that still looked deliberately put together.
No security that she could see. No assistant trailing behind him with a phone and a schedule. He looked like someone who had made a decision and acted on it without overthinking it. He spotted her and walked over directly, no hesitation. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "I just wanted to say it again, properly. What happened last night was unacceptable, and I should have said something sooner than I did. I'm sorry it took as long as it did." Mallory studied him for a moment. He looked like he meant it, which she appreciated. But she had also learned that sincerity and wealth sometimes performed well together without being entirely genuine. "You said it once, last night," she replied. "That was already more than most people would have done." "Most people should do better than that." "Most people don't." He nodded slowly, accepting that without arguing it.
She noticed he didn't try to fill the silence with justification or additional explanation. He had said what he came to say, and was giving her room to respond without pressure. "I appreciate you coming," Mallory said, "and I accept the apology. But I want to be straightforward with you. I don't need anything else from this. Not a gift, not a favor, not a comped meal or a donation made in my name to smooth things over. I'm fine." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, more like recalibration. "I didn't bring anything," he said. "Good. I didn't plan to." "Even better." He was quiet for a second, and then something close to a smile crossed his face, though it didn't quite land there. "You're very direct." "I find it saves time." "It does," he agreed. "I respect that." Mallory crossed her arms loosely, not defensively, just comfortably. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Last night, was that about her, or was it about me?" He didn't answer immediately, which she respected. He thought about it, genuinely, the way people do when they've been asked something they haven't already rehearsed an answer to. "Both," he said finally. "What she said was cruel, and I wasn't going to sit there and let it keep going. But it wasn't a performance. I wasn't trying to look like a good person in front of a room full of people." He paused. "I'm not always a good person. But I know what cruelty looks like, and I don't enjoy watching it." Mallory considered that answer. It was honest in a way she hadn't anticipated, including the part where he admitted he wasn't always good. Most people in his position would have leaned hard into the heroic version of the story. He hadn't. "Okay," she said simply. "Okay," he repeated. They stood there for a moment, in the kind of comfortable silence that usually only exists between people who have known each other far longer than they had. "I should get back," Mallory said. "Lunch service starts in 40 minutes. "Of course." He took a small step back, giving her space to leave first. "Thank you for coming out." "Thank you for not making it weird," she said. That almost smile appeared again. This time, it got a little further. She walked back toward the kitchen, retied her apron, and returned to the dessert station without looking back. But she was thinking about what he had said, the honesty of it, the way he had answered her question as though it deserved a real answer rather than a polished one. She picked up the inventory clipboard and started counting again. 40 minutes to lunch service. She had work to do. Brooklyn, on a Saturday morning, had its own particular energy. Not the rushed, pointed movement of Manhattan, where everyone walked like they were already late for something. Brooklyn moved differently, slower in some places, louder in others, with fruit vendors setting up on corners and kids on bikes cutting through crosswalks and music drifting out of open apartment windows.
Mallory had lived here for 4 years and still felt something settle in her chest every time she crossed the bridge back into the neighborhood after a long week. She had the day off, which was rare enough that she had made a small list of things to do with it. Laundry, a walk, groceries, maybe an hour at the community kitchen in the evening if they were short-handed. Nothing complicated. She preferred her days off simple. The weeks were complicated enough on their own. The grocery store on Fulton Street was busy the way it always was on Saturdays, carts bumping in narrow aisles, a line at the deli counter that stretched almost to the bread section. Mallory moved through it efficiently, basket over one arm, checking her list on her phone with the other. She bought what she needed and skipped what she wanted, the way she always did at the end of the month when the numbers in her account needed careful handling. She was comparing 2 brands of pasta sauce, one 40 cents cheaper, with nearly identical ingredients, when she heard someone stop beside her. "The one on the left,"
a voice said. Same manufacturer, different label. She turned. Grayson Vale was standing in the pasta aisle of a Brooklyn grocery store in a plain navy t-shirt and dark trousers, holding a small basket with 2 items in it, looking almost aggressively ordinary. Mallory stared at him for a second. "You shop in Brooklyn," she said. "I own an apartment 3 blocks from here," he replied. "I've had it for years. It's quieter than Manhattan on weekends." She looked at his basket, a bag of ground coffee and a lemon. "That's your grocery run?" "I wasn't planning to cook. I just needed coffee." "And a lemon." "And a lemon," he confirmed, as though that required no further explanation. Mallory put the cheaper pasta sauce in her basket and moved down the aisle. He fell into step beside her, not intrusively, just naturally, the way people sometimes do in narrow spaces. "You don't have someone who does this for you?" she asked. "Does what?" "Groceries, errands. I assume people at your level had people for everything." He considered this as they turned the corner toward the canned goods. "I have an assistant for work. I don't have someone who buys my coffee. That feels like something I should be able to manage on my own." "Most people in your position wouldn't think about it either way." "Maybe." He reached past her to grab a can of tomatoes from the top shelf without being asked, because she had been looking at it and it was clearly slightly out of comfortable reach. He handed it to her without making anything of it, and she took it the same way. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." They moved through the store in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Mallory checked her list. Eggs. She turned toward the refrigerated section, and he followed at a natural distance, not hovering, not pushing conversation. At the checkout, she spread her items on the belt methodically, produce first, then cans, then dry goods, and counted the total in her head, the way she always did before the register confirmed it. She had the exact amount ready before the cashier finished scanning. Grayson stood behind her with his coffee and his lemon. Outside, she picked up both reusable bags and shifted them onto her arms. They were heavy enough to notice, but manageable. He watched her adjust them without immediately jumping in, which she appreciated. "I can carry one of those," he offered, after she had them settled. "I'm fine," she said. "I walk this every week." "I know. I'm offering anyway." She looked at him. "I've been carrying my own bag since I was 19. It's not a hardship." "I didn't say it was." He held her gaze. "Sometimes people offer to help, not because they think you can't manage, but because they want to." That landed differently than she expected. She thought about it for a beat. "I know," she said. "I just don't accept help easily."
It's a habit. A useful one, probably. It's kept me standing. They walked out together onto the sidewalk. The morning sun was cutting low between the buildings, and the street smelled like someone nearby was frying something with garlic and onion. A kid on a skateboard rolled past them with total disregard for pedestrian space. "Which direction?" he asked. She nodded left. He nodded right. "Different directions," she said. "Most of the time," he replied. She shifted the bags on her arms and looked at him for a moment. This man who had ended his engagement in a hotel ballroom, who bought 1 lemon on a Saturday morning, who offered help without making it feel like charity. "Enjoy your coffee," she said. "Enjoy your pasta sauce," he replied. She turned and walked left down the block, bags on both arms, list completed, days still ahead of her. She didn't look back, but she was smiling by the time she reached the corner. Not because anything had happened, just because sometimes a regular Saturday morning surprised you in the most ordinary way possible. And that was somehow better than anything planned. Grayson Vale had not built what he built by ignoring things that deserved attention. He had learned early, from his father, from the streets, from years of watching people reveal themselves in small moments, that character was rarely announced. It showed up in the details, in how someone treated a stranger when no one important was watching, in what a person chose to do with their time when they weren't being observed or evaluated.
He hadn't meant to notice anything further about Mallory Pierce, but the grocery store encounter had stayed with him longer than he expected, sitting quietly in the back of his mind, the way things do when they mean more than you've given them credit for. There was something about the way she moved through the world, certain, unbothered, carrying her own weight without complaint, that he kept returning to. He wasn't investigating her. That distinction mattered to him, and he held it clearly. He hadn't asked anyone to look into her background, or pull her records, or compile a report. What he knew because he had been paying the kind of attention that any person pays when another person interests them. What he learned by accident. It was a Tuesday evening when he saw her the first time, outside the hotel and the grocery store. He had been leaving a meeting in downtown Brooklyn, walking to where his driver was parked 2 blocks away, when he passed a narrow side street and caught a familiar profile through a lit window. The building was a converted ground floor space, modest and worn, with a hand-painted sign above the door that read, "Fulton Community Kitchen, open to all." Through the window, he could see long, folding tables, mismatched chairs, and people moving around inside with purpose. Steam from large pots. The kind of organized chaos that meant a meal was being prepared for a lot of people. And there was Mallory, still in her work clothes from what he could tell, a different apron over them now, carrying a large tray of bread rolls to one of the tables and saying something that made the older woman beside her laugh. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, long enough to confirm what he was seeing, and then kept walking. He came back Thursday, not to watch her specifically, but because something about the place had stuck with him. He walked past again around the same time. The lights were on. Through the door, which was propped open that night, he could hear the general noise of a busy kitchen. Someone calling out that they needed more serving spoons, another voice responding from somewhere deeper in the building. He asked his driver to wait and walked to the door. A volunteer near the entrance, a teenager with a clipboard, told him the kitchen served between 60 and 90 people on a typical weeknight and relied entirely on donations and a rotating group of volunteers. They were always short on equipment. Their largest stock pot had cracked the previous month and hadn't been replaced. They made do. Grayson nodded, thanked the teenager, and left. The following morning, he made a call. Not to anyone on his team. This wasn't a business matter, and he didn't want it handled like one. He called a restaurant supply company directly, placed an order, paid for it, and had it delivered to the kitchen's address with a note that said only, "For the community." No acknowledgement necessary, no name, no company letterhead, no philanthropic angle to leverage later. He didn't tell anyone he had done it. 3 days later, he was on a call with his operations director when a message came through on his personal phone from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it until the call ended, then checked it. It was a photo. Someone had taken a picture of the new equipment, the stock pots, the serving trays, the commercial-grade ladles, arranged in the kitchen, with a handwritten note taped to one of the pots that said, "To whoever did this, thank you. You have no idea how much this matters." He looked at the photo for a long moment. He didn't know who had sent it or how they'd found his number, and he didn't particularly want to. He saved the photo, put his phone face down on the desk, and went back to work. What he didn't see, but what happened that same evening, was this. Mallory arrived at the kitchen for her regular Tuesday shift to find the new equipment already integrated and in use. She asked the kitchen coordinator, an older man named Gerald, where it had come from. Gerald told her about the anonymous donation, the supply company delivery, the note, the fact that no one had claimed it. Mallory stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at the new stock pots on the industrial burners, steam already rising from them. She was used to the world taking from places like this, cutting funding, overlooking need, treating community kitchens as afterthoughts. She was not used to someone quietly giving without expectation. "Did anyone try to find out who sent it?" she asked Gerald. "I made a few calls," he said. "Supply company wouldn't say. Paid in full. No business account. No name attached." She nodded slowly. Well, she said, picking up her apron from the hook by the door and tying it behind her. Whoever it was, they actually paid attention. Most people look at a place like this and see a problem. This person saw a solution. She went back to work. She never connected it to Grayson. And Grayson, 3 miles away in a glass-walled office, pulled up his next meeting agenda and moved on with his evening. But something between them had shifted, quietly, without either of them knowing it. The kind of shift you only recognize later, when you look back and understand exactly when things began to change. The invitation came through the hotel's front desk on a Wednesday morning. Not flowers, not a gift basket, not an envelope with a card inside that had been chosen by an assistant and signed without much thought. Just a small, folded note, handwritten, left with Claire at reception and passed to Mallory before her shift started. There's a cafe on Atlantic Avenue called Rosario's. Family-owned, been there since 1987. Best coffee in Brooklyn, in my opinion. If you'd like to have lunch sometime this week, I'll be there Thursday at noon. No obligation, no agenda. G. Mallory read it twice, standing at the service station with her apron half-tied. She appreciated that it wasn't a question. He hadn't asked if she wanted to, which would have put the pressure of the decision entirely on her response. He had simply stated where he would be and left the rest open. She could show up, or she could not. And either way, the note didn't demand anything from her. She folded it, put it in her pocket, and went to work. She thought about it through her entire shift without coming to a conclusion.
By the time she got home that evening, she had talked herself in and out of it 3 separate times. It wasn't nervousness exactly. It was more the particular caution that comes from experience, from knowing that people who exist at a certain level of power sometimes extend kindness with invisible strings attached. Not always deliberately, but attached nonetheless. She thought about the grocery store, the way he had handed her the can without making it a gesture, the way he had offered to carry the bags and accepted her refusal without sulking, the way he had answered her question at the hotel with honesty instead of performance. She showed up Thursday at noon. Rosario's was exactly what the note had implied. Narrow, warm, with mismatched wooden chairs and a glass display case of pastries near the door. The walls held decades of framed photographs and a menu written in chalk that hadn't changed much since the 90s. It smelled like espresso and something sweet baking somewhere in the back. 2 older men sat at the counter, arguing about baseball, with the calm intensity of people who had been having the same argument for years. Grayson was already there, at a corner table, no phone out, no laptop, no papers spread across the surface. He stood when she came in, which she noticed, and waited until she had sat down before sitting himself. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't," she replied. "What changed your mind?" She picked up the laminated menu, even though she had already decided on coffee. "The cafe, mostly. I've walked past it 100 times and never gone in." He smiled at that, a real one this time, not the almost smile she had seen twice before. It changed his face considerably. They ordered, coffee for both, and Mallory added a sandwich because she hadn't eaten since 6 that morning and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He ordered the same without commenting on it. The conversation started carefully, the way first real conversations do between people who have only met in charged circumstances. They talked about Brooklyn, the changes in the neighborhood, the things that had stayed the same, the particular stubbornness of family-owned businesses that refused to be replaced by chains. Grayson knew the owner, a woman in her 70s named Rosa, who came out briefly to say hello and called him Caro in a way that suggested he had been coming here long enough to earn it. "How long have you had the Brooklyn apartment?" Mallory asked. "Since I was 22, he said, "before most of the money. It was the first place I bought that was actually mine, not connected to the business, not an investment. I kept it." "Even though you could have something bigger?"
especially because I could." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "That's an interesting reason." "It keeps me honest," he said simply. "When everything around you scales up, you need something that stays the same size." Mallory set her cup down. "Can I ask you something direct?" "You're going to regardless," he said, and it wasn't unkind. "What is it you actually want here? From this lunch, from the apologies, from running into me at a grocery store?" She wasn't accusatory. She was just asking the question that had been sitting at the back of everything since the ballroom. "Because men in your position don't usually spend this much time on someone they'll never see again after the situation is resolved." He was quiet for a moment. The baseball argument at the counter had settled into something more companionable. "I don't know yet," he said, "and I think that's actually the honest answer. I'm not here with a plan. I'm here because you're the most interesting person I've met in a long time, and I'd like to know more about you. And I thought lunch at a place without a dress code was a reasonable place to start." Mallory considered that. "I want to own a restaurant someday," she said, and she wasn't sure why she told him right then, except that it felt like the appropriate exchange, honesty for honesty. "Not like this, although this is lovely. Something with the same feeling, where the menu is honest and the prices are fair, and nobody gets looked at sideways when they walk through the door, regardless of what they're wearing or what they look like." Something in his expression settled, like a question had been answered that he hadn't known he was asking. "That's a good restaurant," he said. "I think so too," she replied. "I just have to build it first." They stayed at Rosario's for 2 hours. When they left, they walked in the same direction for half a block before their routes split again, and this time Mallory didn't think about what it meant. She just walked home, full of good coffee and something quieter than hope, but pointed in the same direction. Word traveled fast in certain circles. It always did when Grayson Vale was involved. He had spent enough years at the center of business decisions, quiet deals, and high-stakes negotiations to understand that his movements were watched by people with interests in what he did next. That was simply the reality of operating at the level he operated at. Your choices were never entirely private, even when you made them quietly. So it didn't surprise him when, 2 weeks after the lunch at Rosario's, his operations director Marcus pulled him aside after a board meeting and asked if they could speak privately. Marcus was 53, had been with the company for 11 years, and was one of the few people whose judgment Grayson actually respected. He wasn't a gossip. When he asked to speak privately, there was always a real reason behind it. They sat in Grayson's office after everyone else had cleared out. "I'm going to say this once," Marcus began, "because I think you'd rather hear it from me than read it somewhere." "Go ahead." "People are talking about the waitress from the Harrington." Grayson leaned back in his chair. "People talk about everything. This is different. 3 of your executive partners have mentioned it independently in the last week. Not to you, to each other, and then eventually to me." Marcus chose his words with the care of someone who had rehearsed this. "The concern is optics. You ended a high-profile engagement publicly, and now you're seen regularly with a hotel employee. They think it looks impulsive, like the Vanessa situation unsettled you, and you're—" He paused, filling a gap. Grayson looked at him steadily. "And what do you think?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that you're one of the most deliberate people I've ever worked with, and you don't do anything without knowing exactly why you're doing it. So I'm not here to warn you off anything. I'm here because I thought you should know the conversation is happening." "I appreciate that." Grayson was quiet for a moment. "Tell them her name is Mallory Pierce. She works hard. She's building something real with her life, and my time spent with her has nothing to do with this company's performance or their investment returns. If they have concerns about either of those things, my door is open. If they want to discuss who I spend my personal time with, that conversation doesn't exist." Marcus nodded once. Message received, message understood. "I'll handle it," he said, and left. Grayson turned his chair toward the window
and looked out at the city for a long moment. He had known this was coming. It always came, in different forms, from different directions. The quiet pressure from people who believed that influence should only move within pre-approved social boundaries. He had navigated it his entire adult life and had learned early that the fastest way to lose yourself was to let other people's expectations define your decisions. He picked up his phone and moved on with his afternoon.
What Grayson didn't know was that the pressure wasn't only coming from his side. Mallory heard about it from the last person she expected, her co-worker, Diana, who worked the front desk at the Harrington and had the particular gift of knowing everything before it became official. "Someone called the hotel last week," Diana told her during their break, keeping her voice low and her expression neutral. "Asked HR questions about you. Not a guest complaint, not a reference check. More like someone building a picture." Mallory set her coffee down. "What kind of questions?" "How long you'd worked here, whether you had any incidents on record, whether the hotel had any policy concerns about employees socializing with guests." Diana shrugged. "HR didn't give anything, obviously, but they flagged it." Mallory was quiet for a moment. She wasn't naive. She had understood from the beginning that stepping into even a casual friendship with someone like Grayson meant stepping into the edge of a world that played differently than hers. She just hadn't expected the friction to arrive this quickly or from this angle. That evening, a delivery arrived at her apartment building. A concierge courier, which was already unusual for her street, carrying a box from a boutique she recognized because she had walked past it many times without going in. She didn't open the door fully. "I didn't order anything," she told the courier. "Complimentary delivery, ma'am. No signature required." "Return it," she said. "Whoever sent it, return it." She closed the door and stood in her hallway for a moment. She didn't need to know for certain who had sent it, though she had a reasonable guess. The timing was too clean. The next time she saw Grayson, a Saturday afternoon, a walk along the Brooklyn waterfront that had started as a phone call and turned into something in person, she brought it up directly. "Did you send a package to my apartment this week?" He looked at her. "No." She studied his face. He wasn't lying. "Someone did. From a boutique. I sent it back." "Good," he said. It came out with an edge she hadn't heard from him before, directed inward rather than at her. "I'll find out who." "You don't need to," she said. "I just want to be clear about something. This," she gestured between them, "whatever this is, it works because it's been equal. The moment it becomes about money or gifts or someone trying to smooth things with expensive packages, I walk away from it. Not because I'm proud, but because I've built everything I have on my own, and I'm not interested in someone deciding I need upgrading." He stopped walking. "I know that," he said. "I need you to mean it." "I do." She looked at him for a long moment, the water moving quietly behind them, and then nodded once and kept walking. He fell back into step beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while after that, but the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that only exists between people who have just said something true and don't need to fill the space around it. It started with a photograph. Someone had taken it outside Rosario's, either on the Thursday they had first met there or one of the 2 times they had returned since. The angle suggested a phone camera, casual and quick, the kind of shot taken by someone passing on the sidewalk who recognized a face and acted on instinct. In the photo, Grayson and Mallory were at the window table, coffee cups between them, mid-conversation. Nothing incriminating, nothing even particularly intimate, just 2 people talking. But context, as Mallory had learned over years of watching how the world interpreted things, was rarely what drove a story. The caption beneath the photo, posted on a gossip account with several 100,000 followers, did the actual work. Grayson Vale's rebound? Weeks after dumping fiancée Vanessa Sterling at a charity gala, the billionaire has been spotted getting cozy with a waitress from the Harrington Hotel. Sources say she's been angling for his attention since the night of the incident. Convenient timing, don't you think? By the time Mallory saw it, Diana had sent the link with a message that said simply, "Heads up." It had already been shared several thousand times and picked up by 2 entertainment blogs that had added their own speculation on top of the original post. She read it once, put her phone face down on her kitchen table, and finished making her tea. Then she picked the phone back up and read it again. Not because the content changed on second reading, but because she wanted to be sure of exactly what was being said before she decided how to feel about it. The claim was clear. She had engineered the situation at the charity dinner to attract Grayson's attention. Everything after, the apologies, the grocery store, the cafe, the walks, had been calculated on her part. She was, according to the post and the comments beneath it, a woman who had spotted an opportunity and moved toward it deliberately. She sat with that for a while. The anger came, but it came slowly and without heat. More like cold clarity than anything burning. She had spent her entire working life being underestimated and misread. Her appearance, her job, her income, her choices. And she had made a quiet decision years ago that she would not allow other people's narratives about her to become the story she told herself. She was not going to call Grayson in a panic. She was not going to post a response or issue a correction or reach out to the gossip account. She was not going to do any of the things that would center this moment and make it larger than it deserved to be. She went to work the next morning the same way she always did. The difference was that several guests looked at her differently. Not everyone, and not obviously, but she noticed it. The slight pause before ordering, the glance held a second too long, the table of women near the window who went quiet when she approached and resumed talking when she left. She absorbed it the way she absorbed most things and kept moving. Her manager called her into the office mid-morning. He was a careful man who chose words deliberately and rarely made decisions quickly, which she had always respected about him. "I want you to know," he said, "that as far as this hotel is concerned, your employment record is spotless and your performance is not under review. I'm not calling you in here to warn you or to ask you to change anything." "Then why am I here?" she asked. "Because 2 journalists have already called the front desk this morning asking for a comment, and I want you to hear from me directly that we've declined both times and will continue to decline." He looked at her steadily. "How are you doing?" It was such a simple question that it caught her slightly off guard. "I'm fine," she said, and then, more honestly, "I'm annoyed, but I'm fine." He nodded. "Take the rest of the morning if you need it." "I don't," she said. "I'd rather work." She went back to the floor. Grayson saw the post 4 minutes after it went live. His communications director had a monitoring system for his name, and the alert came through before most people had even shared it. By the time it had 1,000 shares, he had already read the original post, the follow-up blogs, and the comment threads that were busy constructing a version of events that had nothing to do with what had actually happened. His communications director sent a draft response within the hour. Clean, professional, factual. A 3-sentence correction of the timeline that would effectively neutralize the narrative without escalating it. Grayson read the draft. Then he called the director and said 2 words. "Don't post." "Sir, the story is already gaining." "I know what it's doing. Don't post." He hung up and sat for a moment. Then he called Mallory. She answered after 3 rings, the background noise of the hotel behind her voice.
"I've seen it," she said before he could speak. "I have a response ready," he said. "My team drafted something. I haven't posted it. I wanted to ask you first." There was a pause. "You're asking me?" "It affects you more than it affects me. Your name is in it. Your job is in it. I'm not going to make a decision about how to respond without knowing what you want." She was quiet for a moment. Around her, the hotel kept moving. Trays, footsteps, someone calling an order from the kitchen. "Don't post anything," she said. "Okay." "If we respond, we make it real.
If we just keep going, it stays what it is, someone's opinion with a camera phone. He was quiet for a beat. You're sure? I've never chased a story in my life, she said. I'm not starting now. After she hung up, she stood at the service station for a moment, tray in hand, and then she went back to work. 3 months had passed since the charity dinner. Mallory marked it not because she had been counting, but because the seasons had shifted enough to notice. The mornings were cooler now, the light coming through her apartment window at a different angle, the walk to the subway requiring a jacket where it hadn't before. Time had moved in the way it does when you're busy enough to stop watching it closely. Things between her and Grayson had settled into something that didn't require a label. They talked regularly, sometimes daily, sometimes with a few days between, depending on what their schedules demanded. They had fallen into the easy rhythm of two people who had decided, without formally deciding, that the other person was worth making time for. No announcements, no definitions, just consistency, which Mallory had always trusted more than declarations. She was happy, quietly, practically happy, the kind that doesn't announce itself but shows up in small ways, in the fact that she slept better, laughed more easily, felt less like she was holding everything together through sheer willpower alone. The community kitchen had become something of a shared conversation point. Grayson had eventually admitted to the anonymous donation, not as a confession, but as a natural part of a conversation about the kitchen one evening, and Mallory had looked at him for a long moment before saying simply that she appreciated it, but that he should have just said so. He had agreed. It was one of those small exchanges that mattered more than the topic itself. She was walking past a stretch of storefronts on Atlantic Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon, her day off, her usual walk, when she stopped. The restaurant had been there for as long as she could remember. Alma's Kitchen, a neighborhood fixture with hand-lettered signage in the window and checked tablecloths visible through the glass. She had eaten there twice years ago and remembered it being the kind of place that felt like someone's home. Warm food, honest prices, regulars who came in and sat at the same table every week. The sign in the window was new. After 31 years, we are closing our doors. Thank you, Brooklyn. Alma and Joe. Mallory stood on the sidewalk and read it twice. She pressed her hand flat against the glass and looked inside. The chairs still upended on the tables from the previous night, the chalkboard menu still up on the wall, the framed photographs of the neighborhood going back decades. Everything still there, just no one in it. She stood there for a long time. That evening, she called Grayson, not about the restaurant, but because they had plans to talk, and she mentioned it in passing, the way you mention something that's still sitting in your chest, but that you haven't fully processed yet. Alma's Kitchen is closing, she said, on Atlantic Avenue. 31 years. He was quiet for a moment. I know the place. The owners are retiring. Joe had a health scare last year, I think. They want to rest. She paused. It's the right thing for them.
I just hate seeing it go. Another pause from his end, slightly longer. Have you ever looked into what it would take, he asked, to buy something like that?
I've thought about it, she said. The finances don't work yet. I've been saving, but I'm not close enough, and a bank loan for a first-time restaurant owner with no business credit history is... She stopped. It's a long road.
What if it wasn't as long as you think? She recognized the tone and met it directly.
Grayson.
I'm not offering to buy it for you, he said immediately. That's not what I mean.
Then what do you mean?
I mean, I know Alma and Joe. Not well, but enough. They've been turning down corporate buyers for 2 years because they don't want the place gutted and rebranded. They want it to go to someone who'll keep it what it is. He paused. What if you talk to them yourself, with your own plan? What you told me at Rosario's, the restaurant you want to build. What if that was the pitch? Mallory sat with that for a long moment.
They'd want to see numbers, she said.
Then put together numbers.
A business plan takes time. You have time. They haven't listed it officially yet." She was quiet, thinking it through practically the way she always approached things. Not the dream of it, but the actual mechanics. What she had saved, what financing might look like, what she knew about running a kitchen versus owning one, what she didn't know and would need to learn. "I'd want to do this properly," she said. "My own plan, my own presentation, not something handed to me." "That's the only version of this I'm suggesting," he said. "I'll introduce you if you want the introduction. After that, it's entirely yours." She spent the next 2 weeks building the business plan at her kitchen table after shifts, cross-referencing food cost formulas with neighborhood demographic data, pricing out equipment she already knew from years of working around it, writing and rewriting a one-page vision statement that captured exactly what she had told Grayson at Rosario's, a restaurant where everyone was welcome, where the food was real, and where nobody was made to feel less than anyone else at the door. The meeting with Alma and Joe happened on a Thursday morning. Mallory arrived alone, plan printed and bound, dressed in her own clothes, not a uniform. She sat across from 2 people in their 70s who had built something from nothing and were now deciding what happened to it next. She talked for 40 minutes. They asked questions, hard ones. She answered every one. At the end, Alma looked at Joe. Joe looked at Mallory. "You remind me of me," Alma said. 31 years ago. The financing arrangement they agreed on was fair. Structured payments over 5 years, a transition period where Alma and Joe would remain available for guidance, and one condition that Alma stated clearly. "Keep the checked tablecloths," she said. "Everything else is yours." Mallory drove home alone and sat in her car outside her building for 10 minutes before going inside. She called Grayson. "They said yes," she said. The silence on his end lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "Of course they did," he said. The grand opening was on a Saturday. Mallory had chosen Saturday deliberately, the day the neighborhood moved at its own pace, when people had time to wander in without rushing back to something else, when families came out and regulars took their time over coffee, and the street outside had a particular energy that felt communal rather than transactional. She wanted the restaurant's first day to feel like it belonged to the neighborhood, because in every way that mattered, it did. She had kept the name. That had been her first decision after signing the papers, and it had surprised people who assumed she would want to put her own stamp on it immediately. But Alma's Kitchen had 31 years of trust built into those 2 words, and Mallory understood that trust was not something you replaced. It was something you inherited carefully and built on slowly. She would earn her own name in time. For now, she was the person who kept the doors open, and that felt like enough. The checked tablecloths were still there. The chalkboard menu was back on the wall, rewritten in Mallory's handwriting. The photographs of the neighborhood stayed in their frames. The 2 things she had changed were small but intentional. Better lighting, warm and even throughout the room rather than the slightly dim atmosphere the old fixtures had produced, and a small sign beside the entrance that read, "Everyone is welcome here. Dress code, whatever you're wearing." She had written that line herself at 2 in the morning, 3 days before opening, sitting at one of the tables with a cup of tea, and she had known immediately that it was right. The morning of the opening, she arrived at 5. Not because there was a crisis. Everything had been prepared the previous evening, the kitchen stocked, the stations organized, her small team of 4 briefed and ready. She arrived at 5 because she wanted 1 hour alone in the space before anyone else arrived. She walked through the dining room slowly, adjusting a fork, straightening a frame, standing at the window and looking out at the empty street in the early light. She thought about the charity dinner, about standing at the service station with her palms flat on the counter and her hands shaking, about the grocery store and the pasta sauce and the lemon that needed no explanation. About Rosario's and 2 hours of coffee and honesty. About Gerald's community kitchen and a stock pot that had been replaced by someone who paid attention. About Alma and Joe across a table, asking hard questions, and the moment Alma had said, "You remind me of me." She thought about how none of it had been planned, not one piece of it, and yet here she was. She went into the kitchen, tied her apron, and started cooking. By 11 o'clock, the line outside extended half a block down Atlantic Avenue. Mallory had expected a reasonable opening day crowd. Word had traveled through the neighborhood over the preceding weeks, and Alma and Joe had told their regulars personally, which carried more weight than any advertisement. What she hadn't expected was the range of people who showed up. Elderly couples who had been coming to Alma's for 20 years, sitting down at their usual tables and nodding approvingly at the tablecloths. Young families with strollers. A group of construction workers from a site 2 blocks over who came in during their lunch break and ordered like they hadn't eaten since Tuesday. A table of women who had clearly dressed up for the occasion and were treating it like an event. Nobody was turned away. Nobody was looked at twice. The door stayed open. Diana from the hotel came in the early afternoon and hugged Mallory so hard her apron shifted. Gerald from the community kitchen arrived with 4 volunteers who had heard through him and sat at the long corner table, laughing and ordering everything on the menu. Her mother called twice, once to say she was proud and once to ask if there were leftovers she could pick up. Mallory handled all of it. She moved through the restaurant the way she had always moved through a dining room, efficiently, warmly, present without being intrusive. But this time the apron was hers. The kitchen behind her was hers. The menu on the board was hers. The decision about who felt welcome when they walked through the door was entirely, completely hers. It was the best feeling she had ever had at work, and she had been working since she was 16. Grayson arrived at 2:30. He had timed it deliberately, she realized, after the lunch rush, when the room had settled into its afternoon rhythm, and she would have a moment to breathe. He came in alone, no security visible, dressed the way he always dressed when he was being a person rather than a CEO. He looked around the room once, taking it in, and then found her near the kitchen door. She walked over. "The sign outside," he said. "Everyone is welcome here." "You saw it." "It's the first thing you see when you come in." He looked at her. "It's perfect." She smiled. "Table for 1? "Table for 2, if you have a minute." She did. She pulled her apron off, handed it to one of her team without a word, and sat down across from him at a table near the window. Outside, the street moved in its Saturday way, unhurried, layered, alive with the particular noise of a neighborhood that knew itself. They didn't talk about business. They didn't talk about what came next or what the future looked like or how far things had come since a charity dinner in a hotel ballroom where a chair scraped back and a man stood up for someone he didn't know. They talked about the food, about the neighborhood, about small things that mattered. At one point, Grayson looked around the room, at the tablecloths and the photographs and the people at every table who had walked through the door in whatever they were wearing and been made to feel exactly as welcome as everyone else, and he said quietly, almost to himself, "This is what you meant." Mallory followed his gaze across the room. "Yes," she said, "this is exactly what I meant." Outside, Brooklyn kept moving. Inside Alma's kitchen, something that had started with a cruel word in a crowded ballroom had become something neither of them could have predicted. A friendship that had quietly, honestly, without performance or agenda, become something closer. Built on nothing more complicated than 2 people who had chosen, at every turn, to treat each other with dignity. And that, in the end, turned out to be everything.